I want to talk about this concept called direct responsible individual. I think it's a similar model as founder mode, which has been talked about a lot in the recent past. And I can walk you through this post I had on Substack recently. So, what is this article about? It's essentially a take on the prevailing model of direct responsible individual leadership that some organizations have. And what I've seen is common pitfalls that come with application of such a model. Before I go in, just a plug, I'm running these leadership boot camps, and the next one is around the corner, the beginning of May, and you have a sweet 25% discount if you're interested. But let's go on to the topic. So, as I started saying, the DRI concept, direct responsible individual, is fairly common structure. It's used to drive ownership with accountability. Essentially, it means that there is one individual that is directly responsible for an outcome, and essentially that person is responsible for decisions that are made. This phrase emerged from Apple. There's a kind of literature around how Apple uses DRI. If you want to read more, there's a book called Creative Selection, where the author who worked at Apple talked about this concept briefly. It is also used in other companies, sometimes in kind of concept called single threaded leadership, which Amazon uses it a lot. There's obviously articles about that as well. Sometimes it's used as a sponsor, the owner. And the fundamental idea is to install a clear owner of an outcome and reduce the decision by committee mindset. We don't want to have a group of people deciding. That takes time. And also sometimes we are swayed by the group mindset. So essentially having one individual who is accountable and decision maker on this. Usually what I've seen is such a model is available at a higher level in organization hierarchy, where a senior leader, like a vice president role, for example, oversees product design and engineering and sales function. That's quite common in companies. And it's also most commonly, you see this model in cross-functional matrix organization where teams are not divided across functions or separated across functions, but they're organized around outcomes. So why am I talking about this? I had the privilege to play this role when I was at Zalando, a company in Berlin. It's a fashion e-commerce company, and I was in company between 2017 and 2019 playing this role. At the time, the role is called dedicated owner, and I led product design and engineering. A little bit of this is also on the McKinsey website on how this concept was applied back in time. But let's just get back to the topic. So I'm going to talk about especially the traits that I believe organization need to drive this DRI effectively and the common pitfalls that you might encounter. So one, DRIs are often reserved for senior most leaders, and it's quite obvious why. At a lower level of hierarchy, the individuals will spend more time building depth and specialization. That's the incentive that they have. And what DRI needs is more T-shaped skill set. Essentially, people who have a good holistic understanding of functions while maintaining a depth in a particular area. Now, you don't see this T-shaped skill that commonly at a lower level in a hierarchical organization. That's why you see a lot of senior leadership taking up this particular role in organizations. So the trait you should be looking out for in your organization is if there are enough incentives available to individuals to adopt this T-shaped skill over time, either through stretch responsibilities that you can give if an individual is quietly demonstrating competency around that. Your career framework should also kind of adapt to have opportunity to extend or stretch an individual to take up DRI role. And the important bit is also that if you're doing this at a lower level of hierarchy, let's say not all at SVP and VP level, but more like a head of engineering, head of product, or even engineering manager level, the T-shaped skill you should be adapted to the smaller scope of problem space, and that allows the individual to build some mastery in the discipline while you have a holistic understanding of other disciplines. So that's one of the things to keep in mind and traits why you see so many DRIs reserved for senior most leaders. I want to extend this topic about stretch responsibility than automatic assignment. So sometimes you see automatic assignments because of lack of capacity or it's a startup and or it's a brand new space and you don't know what to do there, so you just basically assign someone and you adopt a wait and watch model, and then once you understand, you know what organization structures you need, so you start with DRI. But these are what I call automatic assignments. There is no clear assessment if the individual is ready or even the space is ready for being benefited by DRI. So what you need to think about is driving the adoption as a stretch for competent individuals makes more sense. According to me, it's more reasonable. It helps to validate if the individuals is indeed ready for DRI, especially if you're doing it at a lower level of the hierarchy. And in some organizations, you might see this representations of individuals with project management or program management skills automatically assigned as DRI, but they might lack depth in a particular area. So they're focusing purely in project management function as a way to do their work as DRI, which might have challenges, especially almost seems to be that they're operating from an ivory tower setup. The other improper incentive to watch out is you're making that too broad of a scope and you're having individuals with very limited knowledge about many things. That's kind of not a sure shot way for an effective DRI. So what you need is, yes, a broad knowledge is important, but most DRIs have a product sense. They have a taste. And you need is a strong empathy with challenges of functions outside the expertise. So if I'm an engineering background, I understand what design is, how to have them included, what expertise they bring in, what are the challenges, trade-offs when you're making design calls. You still need a depth in your area, but you also need a good understanding, a holistic understanding of different functions and roles, whether it's sales, design, product engineering, whatever is the area responsible. Sometimes legal. In some cases, DRI nomination is dominated by individuals who have a strong depth in an area, which is critical for the outcome of DRI. Like in some cases, this could be a design person because that's what is the most critical outcome, or basically most important ingredient to the outcome of that area. You still need a strong product and business sense, but you have to have that sense to differentiate what is right or wrong, a healthy versus unhealthy, but you come from the point of a depth in an area to drive the outcome as a DRI. I give an example, for instance, a technical capability in a technology platform. You may see a technical expert as DRI and them working with design, product, analytics, and sales function. If you haven't subscribed to my Substack, please do. The link is here. You can find me as Automatic Behaviors or autobehave.substack.com. Let's continue. One of the challenges I've also seen is essentially organizations doing DRI at every level, a lot of crowded DRI, every topic has a DRI. It leads to chaos and just lack of doers. If you all have people who are driving something, who is doing the work, who is supporting those DRIs. So DRIs need to have a strong executional support. They need to have access to talent that they can work with across functional boundaries. And which also essentially means that not everyone needs to be a DRI, and therefore DRI is not seen as the only way for growth in the organization. That's extremely important. And you also need to think about incentivizing great execution, which may come without being an DRI. So keep that in mind. The analogy I give that is in traditional technology organizations, sometimes people see growing as a manager as the only way to grow. So just keep that analogy in mind. Finding the right bounded context for DRI to own and operate. So it's not a broad scope where maybe they're at a mid level of their career and at a mid level in the organizational hierarchy. That's clear. It's important to keep in mind. So have a clear area, clear bounded context, a clear commercial outcome that they're optimizing on. But it should also have a need that they need to work with other functions. If it's just an area, yes, it's easy then just to assign an owner. But if it's having a clear commercial outcome, that means the person is stretching, they're taking responsibility beyond just their technical competency, for example. This is the reason why you see a lot of DRI's implementation at senior levels, where the bounded context becomes more clearer. You have business units, that is the clear bounded context for that level. Let's go to the next one, the role amplification. And this is quite common, right? So if I'm a first time DRI, I will struggle operating beyond my specific skill set, and they might just apply their specific strength as the only way to get things done. So in some cases, I've seen individuals just focusing on project management to drive outcomes because that they think that's the only way to become effective as DRI. Which means they're just focusing on work is happening, they're focusing on structure of work and process, then the work itself. So what I mean by this is amplification of a specific skill could be a recipe for disaster. Therefore, keep in mind if individuals are overusing their area of expertise, if they are a DRI, and they're forgetting the collaborative nature of arriving at outcomes in a DRI setup. So DRIs are essentially doers. They get into details, they care about the process and the results, and it requires them to involve the right people and build collaboration across different functions. The other aspect to keep in mind, DRI is also a culture vehicle. So you need to make sure that it's consistently applied across the organization. You don't want to do scattered implementation where some teams are using DRI, sometimes some teams are not. It may lead to essentially a political situation where there are too many chefs in the kitchen. When somebody complains, hey, why is this person leading this area? Because I'm leading that area. And you need to make sure that a particular outcome is driven by assigned DRI, does not come into conflict with other part of the organization working on something, unless it's deliberate. In a mid to larger company, DRI requires a very strong reinforcement and alignment from top down. That's extremely important. You need a top down buy in. Setting up a bar for such a model, enabling the structures with the stakeholders, communicating what it means, and essentially tying it together with the culture elements. That's why I say DRI is a clear byproduct of a culture, and you don't need a mismatch between DRI expectation and the culture. For instance, if you culture values customer obsession, requiring everyone to have a close proximity to customer, irrespective of role and function, then that will reinforce your right. That's great. However, if the culture is dominated by do it right and just being right, you might see certain challenges with data because people will fear retribution, lack of understanding if I fail, what happens, a lot of lack of psychological safety. The other thing to keep in mind is hiring and retention. So hiring for those traits that make an effective data is extremely important, right? So what to look for here is the ability to empathize and constructive challenge functions. So if I am coming from a function, can I constructively challenge a sales function? Do I know the right way to communicate, argue constructively beyond just my individual expertise? So am I oriented towards outcomes? Which means I'm not just looking at outputs. Oh, I got the work done, but what's the outcome? I'm all focusing on that. I understand the trade-offs that I need to make, especially when I make decisions, is another important trait to look out for. The question asked is, can an individual articulate trade-offs in an interview, for example, or bring along other functions together through informal leadership to drive outcomes? That's a great indication that this person might be a good fit for DRI. You're also looking for areas of expertise where they can zoom in and zoom out. So it is not just their work on Ivory Tower. They have an expertise, whether it's design, product development, engineering, sales, marketing. They have an ability to zoom in and zoom out. It's also important. So how they communicate, because ultimately this individual need to operate in a limited amount of context, and there'll be fuzzy scenarios that they need to encounter and be comfortable at. So finding the feet in that area is an asset for someone being an effective DRI. The other thing I want to talk about is how it differs from, for example, product owner roles, which are sometimes very common in organizations. Also, this application of RACI framework. So a PO role essentially originates some framework. We know about this. There's definitely some overlap with a PO role. However, what differences exist are in the breadth of the autonomy of a DRI versus a product owner, the accountability and the impact on the cross-functional aspects of a DRI. So DRI is directly responsible for the success of failure of product they want to give. There is no like prescribed framework on what they can do and cannot. Essentially, what I expect is DRI is leveraging their native strengths and they adapt whatever is needed to make it success. They don't follow a particular bookish way of just doing this as a process. So DRI may decide to be in the details if that is what is necessary for driving the outcome. And they may, for example, go into engineering, or they may step into a sales conversation or a conversion call for the customer. So DRA is taking a whatever it takes authority and beyond just like, oh, I need to do only this thing to make sure the product is ready to be built, more of an enablement function that is not. The other piece are RACI metrics. If you're applying a RACI metrics to define ownership, accountability, and things like that, there's an assumption that everybody's following a constant role. They have a constant role. Either you are responsible, you're accountable, you're communicated, you're informed. And it's creating a specific hard swim lanes sometimes where people need to just fit in. This is what it is. Yes, you can go back and revisit the RACI, but often that's the nature of things. They are putting you into a box. The difference here is the flexible, intangible nature of DRI differs from applications of RACI. So DRI has the autonomy to deliver the outcome without prescribing to traditional rules and definition and not being in your swim lanes, for example. So let's think about an example. Imagine there's a new product launch and it's faltering because of a supply chain issue. A product owner might just think about, okay, I can do is adjust the release timeline, talk to stakeholders, figure out how to prioritize the backlog. And if somebody's operating in RACI metrics, they know, okay, I need to talk to this person to inform. So just following the structure. But DRI would take it more personally to tackle the issues. They might just say, let's hop on a call, let's negotiate with vendor. Maybe this is not an area that I understand, but I can work with an expert. I can work with subject matter experts who can help with it. Or I can step into looking at budget. So having this very holistic view, but also ability to jump into an issue rather than just staying and orchestrating and enabling is the key element for DRI. So in practice, DRI can definitely work with product owners if that's a setup that you are comfortable or you want in your teams. They may employ RACI, but ultimately, DRI decides what is the right way to approach the outcomes that they are driving and owning. The last piece I want to talk about is this founder mode, which is where the article got started. So, what's the difference between DRI and our founder mode? I think a lot of you already know about founder mode. It was made popular by the article from Paul Graham in 2024, very widely cited and talked about. I see definitely similarities between DRI and founder mode, especially around the mindset of individuals, where DRI is responsible for making sure everything is working with the bounded context of problem space, right? So there's no formal framework, for example, for DRI, which is also a similarity to founder mode. However, the DRI is still dictated by certain guardrails of the organization, the context of the outcome, that this is the boundary, don't go outside the boundary. For example, the problem space you're working on, as an example. But founder mode is more about extreme breadth, especially this is more kind of visible in a startup environment where founders have multiple hats due to constraints of the environment and pace that is required. So it's very much about organic ownership than the formal role like DRI. The key pitfall to be aware here is the prevalence of burnout. So, sometimes founders and DRs alike, they suffer burnout, especially when they try to be hands-on with everything and they are not able to delegate effectively. So for DRIs to be successful and be sustainable, it's critical that a senior leadership is aware that there might be potential burnout of individuals and providing support in terms of coaching and any interventions when needed. Finally, obviously, DRI and single thread leadership is not a silver bullet, but definitely can drive wonders for your team to improve decision making process, to move fast and build outcomes. A final consideration, maybe also a pitfall to keep in mind, is this concept of hero worship, right? Traditionally, in a DRI setup, you might see an individual almost put into a pedestal as a sole contributor. Okay, this person just did everything, and they were the sole reason for success. And that basically means also ignoring people around them, which means that creates almost a bit of toxic environment if this hero worship goes on because of that structure. Yes, there might be the DRIs are taking the risk. Are making the decisions. They are accountable for success and failure, but over amplifying the contribution of DRI as the only reason to get success, it creates a toxic environment. It leads to a slow destruction of a culture as a whole. So keep that in mind uh, of application of DRI. So again, effective model or implementation of such a model comes through combination of many things, right? Hiring decision, supporting culture, individual incentives, clear scope of understanding of the scope and boundary of DRI's impact, and also encouraging individuals to leverage innate strengths, not just be an ivory tower person, and ultimately building collaboration muscle. That's it. That's the article about. Again, thank you so much for people who helped to also contribute, sharing feedback. And again, another plug. If you like what you heard and if you're interested, there's a next boot camp on leadership happening on Maven in a few weeks. You get this link from here to get 25% off. And that's for now. Thank you so much. And we'll see in the next one.